When you're importing images into your Lightroom catalog, you have three options. You can import directly via tethered capture. You can import your images via your memory card, or you can import images from an external hard drive or another folder on your computer. To import images from a memory card, basically what you need to do is go up to your Lightroom file and hit import photos and videos, and it's going to select a source. Now here I've got a memory card that I've popped into the memory card reader that is attached to the computer, and it is this one here. So it's my memory card, EOS Digital, and you can see that there's a little screen here that shows all the images in my memory card. Now they're on the screen, there's a dialog box there, but I haven't yet imported them. So I've got this button here that I can push that will import them. But before I do that, I want to show you a couple of options, and this is where people get a little bit mixed up and lose their images, or a bit confused as to what happened to their images and where they actually end up. So you've got a number of choices here at the top as to what you want Lightroom to do with your images when you're importing from memory card. When you're importing from memory card, Lightroom will give you two different options to download your images. You can copy as DNG or copy. Now, copy as DNG means that Lightroom is going to take your raw image and convert it to a DNG file, which is a digital negative. Now, the DNG format was devised by Adobe because they were worried that there were so many different camera manufacturers that all had different ways of converting raw files, that they were concerned that down the track, perhaps if you had an obscure brand of camera, that you wouldn't be able to have it recognized by certain software. So they saw the DNG as a way of making the raw file universally recognized. If this is something you're concerned about, I suggest you do a little bit more reading about your particular camera brand, and if it's something that you are concerned about, then when you're importing your images, then you might want to copy as a DNG. At this time, I continue to import my Canon files as raw files, and I keep the CR2 raw file format intact. The second option Lightroom gives you when you're importing images from memory card to your Lightroom catalog is the option to copy, and that's basically what it says. It takes the images from your memory card and it copies them to another location. Now, this is where people get a little bit confused. If you scroll down the dialog box here at the side, you'll see that there are a number of options with regard to file handling, and I want to go right down here to the destination. And this is important because most people, when they're first, and I certainly did this when I was first importing my images to Lightroom, is I forget to even look where the images are going. By default, Lightroom will put them in the pictures folder and will put them in folders according to date. So for each day, we'll be given a different folder. Now, I recommend that you tell Lightroom exactly where to store the images that you're downloading from memory card and that you start a more organized system as you're importing the files. The most basic way to do this is to import your images from your memory card into the same folder that you created your Lightroom catalog in. So if I scroll down, I can find my Lightroom catalog here, select it, and I'm going to ask that whenever the files are imported, I put them into a subfolder. And now with each individual import, you can actually give that folder a name. So for this one, I'll just call it test. And then you can, Lightroom will organize the files by date. And so you'll get a different folder of each of the images you took on a particular day. Now, if you are taking lots of different shots, like if you're just shooting on single days, like you might have one shot that you've taken today, another that you've done tomorrow, and your memory card might have 3 months worth of images on single days, I don't recommend you organize your images this way. I suggest that you just put them into one folder, because otherwise what you're going to get is lots and lots and lots of single folders with 1 or 2 images in there. If you're doing jobs where you've got on a single day where you might take a couple of 100 images, then I think the by date option is a good one. So for this case, I've got lots of images all taken on the one day. So I'm going to organize them by date in a subfolder, and they're going into my Lightroom folder together with my Lightroom catalog. So I have everything in one place. There's a couple of other options on you can add to your images as you're importing them, but for now I'm going to uncheck those. I'll go into that in a lot more detail in a future tutorial. Alright, so basically the panel on the left is your source. This is where we're importing from. The panel in the middle are our files that we're selecting, and you can see that I currently have all the images checked. But if you don't want to import all the images from the card into Lightroom, you can uncheck one. So you may have taken some images by accident, or there's some that you know are not going to be worth looking at. You can simply uncheck those and they will not be imported. So it's the only the ones that are checked will be imported. So all right, so I've got my images selected. You can also sort according to the capture time or the check state, or so I always like to sort via capture time. So these images are all organized, ready to import in, and they're sorted via capture time. So the earliest ones that I took are at the start and the latest ones are at the end. And this is particularly handy if you've shot an event and you just want to keep everything in order. And finally, you can actually increase the thumbnail size or decrease to see a quicker overview of all your images. All right, so I like to keep the thumbnails sort of fairly small so I can quickly scroll through, and also make sure that all the images that I thought were on the card are also on the card. The right-hand panel is the destination and file handling. So I've chosen the folder that I want to go into. I've selected to import the images into the Lightroom folder in the pictures folder on my computer. I do strongly recommend that you have an external hard drive to store all your images and your Lightroom catalog together, because it's going to free up space on your computer to actually run Lightroom, and it's also just a much better system to have. So I'm just showing you here as a quick shortcut, but I think as your Lightroom catalog grows, I think the best place for it is on an external hard drive with a backup copy made regularly. Before I start copying these images across, I think it's really important to rename images as they're being imported, and I discussed the importance of renaming images in an earlier tutorial. It just makes it so much easier to find images and keep track of images and keep them organized. Now, if you look in this card that I'm about to import, you can see that I've got two kinds of files. I have the RAW CR2, which is Canon's RAW file naming protocol, and also the JPEG. So in this instance, I was shooting a combination of a RAW and JPEG. I like to do that because it just gives me quick previews, especially when I'm traveling. But what I'm going to do now is, and I've got them sorted via capture time, is rename the files. So I check rename files, and I've got a number of custom options Lightroom will allow you to select, and I've actually created a couple of my own as well. But what I like to have is a custom name, and I keep the original file sequence. The reason I do this is it just makes numbering, continuous numbering, a lot easier. So let's just say I was doing a large job where I was downloading several cards over the course of a day or several days. Now, the first card would be downloaded, and I'd have the custom name and a custom numbering system, but then I would need to remember what the last number was that I used so that I could continue the numbering system. It's one of the unfortunate things about Lightroom is that it doesn't remember the last number that you renamed something, so you've just got to keep track of that. So I have had situations in the past where I've been numbering larger jobs where there's multiple cards, and I've misnumbered, and I will have duplicates with the same number, and it just becomes a big mess. So I find that sticking to the original file number, which is the extension that the camera gives, is a really good way of renaming the files. So that's what I do. And so the custom text, in this instance, I'm going to name it after the place that they were shot, which is Barbados, and then I'm also going to put the year number that they occurred. And so you can see that Lightroom will show you a sample here. So the image will be named Barbados 17 dash and then the file number. So that's how it's going to rename the images. The next one that I like to add in is I like to put metadata into the image. And so this is currently, I include my copyright information, and I'm going to go into all of that in a lot more detail in a future tutorial, exactly adding metadata and using keywords. Okay, so for now, when I'm going to take the opportunity of keeping my files nicely organized by renaming them with a custom name and the original number, all right, and then I have organized them into a subfolder, and I'm going to go ahead and also name the folder that the files are going into after the location or job that I created them in. So, all right, so this could be the people that you photographed, the place that you photographed, and I like to have like a main folder, and then within that I'll have the individual days that I shot in this location. Okay, so I've got my custom name set up, and the my copyright information is going into the file, and as I said, I will give you a detailed tutorial on that shortly. And I've got my location set as well. Okay, so once all that is done, and I've also got the images selected that I want to import, just go ahead and hit import. All right, so, and you can see now that Lightroom doesn't like the fact that I left a space between Barbados and 2017. So there was illegal characters, a space, and so it's put an underscore there for me. And so I just hit OK. And the files are now importing. All right, so all the images are have now been imported to Lightroom, which basically means that Lightroom has looked at the image, each image, created a preview file, and also read each file and created a document which contains all the metadata. So if we look over into our pictures folder, you can see that here's our Lightroom folder where we created the catalog. Here is the test folder that I've created, and inside that I've got the Barbados download with all my images, and they've been separated into separate folders, so based on the date that I shot them in. Okay, so now what I want to show you is something really important, that even though you can see that the images are in the Lightroom folder, in my pictures folder on my computer, if I now try and make any changes to these images outside of Lightroom, Lightroom is not going to like it. So I've got this, the first image, which is 7382, and I'll just show you where that one is. Here, it's that first one. Okay, so we'll just bring that up. That's the raw file. All right, so there it is inside Lightroom. If I now go to my folder and find that image, and I decide I want to rename it something like clouds, okay, and save that. So let's have a look. It would have gone, there it is there. Okay, I've renamed that image cloud. So let's come back and have a look at what happens in Lightroom. 7382. There's a little, and I'll zoom in, there's a little exclamation mark there. And if I click on it, we'll get this dialog box that Barbados 177382 could not be used because the original file could not be found. And this is the kind of message, it's really frustrating, because I think a lot of people, when they're using Lightroom, want to know what happened to my images. Nothing happened. It's the fact that anything you do outside of Lightroom means that Lightroom can no longer reference that file. The link's been broken. Lightroom only recognizes this file name. So if you change that file name outside of Lightroom, Lightroom is no longer going to recognize it. So once you are in a relationship with Lightroom, it's a committed one, and you need to make sure that any changes to your files, if you want to rename the file Cloud, rename it inside of Lightroom. So you get this dialog box and it asks you if you'd like to locate it. And if I go locate, it's going to put up the folder that it was last in, and I can now scroll down to my cloud, click that, select, and Lightroom will tell me that I've selected this file. It has a different name. Are you sure this is the correct file? And that was the original name. I know that I've renamed it, and I can confirm that. And now it's brought that in, and I've got clouds there. So if you're ever in doubt as to where a file is, you can always just right click on the image and put show in Finder, and it'll bring it up for you. Okay, and it'll show you the file order so that you can easily and quickly locate a file. So if you rename a file outside of Lightroom, it will let you see the file. It won't let you develop the file. So you can view it offline. If you've got it on a hard drive and it's not attached, you'll be able to see it. You just won't be able to develop that file. Another common mistake that people make with their Lightroom catalogs is once you've set up your folder, is if you rename a folder outside of Lightroom. So let's just say I now want to rename this Barbados Raw 2017. That makes sense. It makes more sense. I know these are my raw files, so I'll just rename that folder, and then I go back to my Lightroom catalog, and let's have a look here. I'll just bring these all up. Every single one of my images now has that exclamation mark. Lightroom can no longer find my images. But hang on a minute, there they all are. Nothing's changed. They're all still in the folder, but I've renamed the folder. So Lightroom has set up the metadata, the cataloging. Lightroom has set up the catalog system that pointed to Barbados _2017. When I renamed my folder Barbados _raw _2017, Lightroom no longer recognizes that folder, and so it no longer sees those images. So I'll be able to see them in my library, but if I want to develop any of these, it's unable to locate them. And if I try and process, I'll get this very common message: the file cannot be found. It doesn't see it. So again, it's an issue. So it's very important that if you're going to rename a folder, the best place to rename that folder is inside of Lightroom.